back, everybody, to another episode of Making Monsters. I'm Taylor Dahl, and we are continuing on, getting close now to the end of our Getting to Know the Draftees series. We've talked about 5 so far. This is episode 6. We have 2 left to do. So I'm super excited to get to this one because this one was a little bit, probably what people say a reach is what the word they keep linking this to. So we'll get some ideas on that. But we're joined now by the founder of Inside MD Sports. He covers Maryland football. This is Jeff Ermann. Jeff, thanks for hopping on with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
So we will, obviously, I won't make it through this podcast without mentioning DJ Moore. I know you have a lot of familiarity with him, but we'll get to that a little bit later and your thoughts on DJ a little bit. But we're here to chat linebacker Ruben Hyppolite. He was drafted in the 4th round with the 132nd pick by the Bears. Like I said, there was a lot of conversation after this pick was made. Number one, the position in general. I'm not sure how many people thought that linebacker was one of the biggest needs at that pick. There were still some probably positional needs that had a little more value at that. And then just in general, some people kind of use that word reach. I mentioned that at the top. But I want to start with kind of the beginning of his time there at Maryland. And when he came in, it was COVID year. That was really funky for a lot of people. Obviously, players coming into there, was a shortened season. I believe they only played 5 games. So that's you don't really get much playing time. Everything was virtual and weird. But talk a little bit initially about that recruitment and how he got to Maryland, and then just kind of what you did see in flashes that first year.
Yeah, that was a really big recruiting win for Maryland at the time. He was a 4-star recruit out of Florida, had some pretty significant offers at the time. Maryland had been struggling. So he was one of those guys that helped you turn things around, that classic program building block kind of guy, and, really was one of their leaders and one of their better linebackers almost right out of the gate.
Was he a starter right away during those times, or was it kind of like a rotational thing happening?
Yeah, he started some games early on. Really, the only time he hasn't been a full-time starter was early in his freshman year, and then I believe 2 years ago he was out 4 games with an injury. Started 25 out of 25 games the past 2 years. So very consistent, reliable, and durable guy.
Yeah, and that's definitely something you want to hear when you talk about the injuries become a concern with certain players. And when you hear about a player who's there for 5 years and only missed 4 games, that's definitely a positive side of that. And so let's look at that. During those 5 years, just those 4 games, I think it was his sophomore year that happened. So outside of that, starting in a little bit of everywhere, when you look up his draft profile and a lot of the scouting profiles, it says multi-role linebacker. But I want to hear kind of some of the things that he was asked to do at Maryland specifically.
Yeah, I mean, he's typically, I think, an inside guy, sideline to sideline, really athletic, decent in pass coverage, I will say I was a little surprised that he was drafted just because of the lack of hype. And while he was very productive in his career, it wasn't like a highlight reel kind of. He was just like a steady Eddie kind of guy. Mm-hmm. But, he was just asked to plug up the middle, make plays sideline to sideline. He's very athletic. I think some people kind of concluded that he didn't make quite as many plays as he could have with his athleticism because of the defensive scheme. That was a little more read and react kind of principles, but yeah, just a really solid, consistent linebacker.
What would you say during those periods of time throughout those years that improved the most? If you could say you saw one thing from him improve on the field the most, what would it be?
Yeah, I'd say probably pass coverage. He had a few plays in his final year that were plays he wouldn't have made early on, including some a couple sensational ones on the sideline. So I would say probably his pass coverage. He's always been a solid run guy.
And that's honestly one of the things, if you look at draft profiles, which they're breaking down everything. And for that, they mention the struggles, especially early on in his first few seasons in that coverage. And it's something that linebackers are asked to do more and more now in the NFL. And so it will be interesting to see exactly what that looks like. If you look at the depth chart right now, he's sitting behind Tremaine Edmonds, who honestly has been a little bit of a disappointment to Chicago since they signed him. So I truly think he has a chance if they want to put it as a battle in camp between those two. Going up against a veteran like Tremaine Edmonds will be difficult, but maybe it'll be good for someone like Hippolit and good for the Bears in the future. But when you're talking about kind of what that Maryland defense identified as. How would you describe the defense and what to expect? Because we have a Dennis Allen defense kind of taking over, and there's some very, very kind of specific things that Dennis Allen asked for.
Yeah, a lot of it was 3 down linemen. Like I said, it was a little more read and react than like a all-out blitzing kind of scheme, things like that. So we really haven't seen him as a blitzer. I don't think that's going to be his, general, what he's known for, but we haven't really seen him in that way. So.
What about personality-wise? That's a big thing when you're drafting guys, especially a guy like Ryan Poles, the Bears general manager, has passed over some players because of concerns when it comes to off the field or personality, Jalen Carter being one of those guys that he skipped over. How would you describe Hippolite's personality, kind of his leadership on that? Because being there for 5 years, I'm sure he had some sort of leadership role also.
Yeah, I would say if the draft were just based on those things, he would have been a top 10 pick. I mean, he's incredible kid, one of the most mature, high character guys that I've seen come through the program. Even when he arrived as a freshman early on, he sounded like, just a veteran, generally speaking, super smart, one of the team leaders, was a captain at least 1 year at Maryland. I don't think you would have a lot of trouble finding anyone to say anything negative about him.
And that's definitely a positive, the things that meshes in well with what the Bears are trying to pick. We have a couple cool storylines already coming out of camp with him, and I shared one with you. He had the bear hat on. It was a hat that he was wearing. It had not a Chicago bear. It was just a bear on it, and it said defense. And then he said at the press conference that someone asked him about the hat, and he said he had got that hat 3 weeks before the draft and then ends up getting drafted by the Bears. So that's kind of funny. But then also Ben Johnson, last week, I believe it was, they were asking him if anybody specifically has stood out in camp so far, and he said Ruben Hyppolite's name. He named 3 names, and Ruben was one of the ones that he name dropped specifically, which I think is a positive because Ben Johnson is, we've heard he's a little chirpy. He's very perfectionist with everything. So that to me shows that Hippolyte's been kind of bugging his offense a little bit for him to point that out. But when you're talking about his time there at Maryland, because we have these guys all the time when they're going from college to the NFL. Sometimes you kind of see the slow workup, and I think we may see that from Ruben just because he doesn't have to come out and be a starter right away. But in a Dennis Allen offense, you'll see a lot of moving parts. You'll see some rotational things, and you mentioned that word athletic earlier, and Dennis Allen's defenses thrive off of athletic linebackers. So I think it's a perfect fit in that sense. And would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if he's going to come in and be a star right away, but being a 5-year college guy with his level of maturity, intelligence, work ethic, I'm not surprised at all that he's already earning, strong reviews in camp, despite being a 5th round pick that most people didn't think would get drafted. So when you have that kind of those kind of intangibles working in your favor, it's going to boost everything. It's going to boost your chances of success, obviously, all along the way.
I know the coaches are worried about bigger things in the offseason. There's a lot of recruiting going on, but did any of them talk about his being drafted and them being surprised about it? Or I'm sure they were encouraged that he was able to.
Yeah, I think it was a little surprise, not really that much because of him as a player, but just more because he wasn't showing up on any lists as far as I saw. They had 5 or 6 other guys who were, but he wasn't on any. So that was really the reason for the surprise about it, not because, they didn't think he was a good enough player or anything like that. He was, one of the better linebackers they've had come through in the past several years.
If you were to say, and I know this is I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you were to tell a Bears fan, if they wanted to watch a game where you feel like you could really get a sense of who Ruben is there a specific game that you remember maybe popping out to where he made a big play, or it was just a game where the defense as a whole, you can see some of the things shine?
That's funny, Taylor. I would have to. He's had several in his career. Unfortunately, I'm getting older, and I've watched so many games now that it's hard to recall. I don't recall which ones, but if you watch his video from last year, you'll see plenty of plays on that one. He's had some. He was their best defender in a lot of games. He led the team in tackles last year, so it's pretty consistent production.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know Ryan Poles, a lot of people, I feel like he might have stuck his neck out for this one a little bit. He's had some of those players that he's done that for. Some we've seen some work, we've seen some not work whatsoever. A guy he drafted a few years ago out of Tennessee, Avalis Jones Jr., did not work out so well. And so I know a lot of Bears fans are a little hesitant, but I think that if you get some of the flashes and that athleticism, and he kind of can develop that coverage side of things a little bit more, I do think you can see a player that can be pretty solid and not, like I said, not have to rush into this. So I want to talk a little bit, like I said, I want to share some stories or some thoughts about DJ Moore, because DJ Moore, we love in Chicago. When the trade happened with Carolina, Chicago fans were ecstatic. And DJ Moore has been such a big focal part of this offense, and now it's being built into something else. Obviously, they drafted Rome Odunze this last year. This year, they add Colston Loveland on top of Cole Kmet. So there's a lot of pieces. Oh, Luther Burden also drafted this year. So a lot of offensive pieces added to help DJ Moore out a little bit, so he doesn't have to be the only one. But share some thoughts on DJ and how you feel about him at all levels when you covered him to now.
I mean, he's one of the best receivers probably in Maryland history, and there's been several good ones. Obviously, Stephon Diggs is right up there, but there's some kids you can tell even when they come in as freshmen, you can tell they're different. You know, they just move a little differently, and you're like, that guy has the star power. And like, you don't necessarily even have one of them. I mean, there's guys you think that guy's going to be good, but there's guys like him where you look at them and you know right away that there's something there. So he showed it off right away. He wasn't that touted. I mean, he was a 4-star recruit, but he wasn't, he didn't have offers from all the blue bloods or anything like that. And you could see it early, and by his second and third year, you knew he was going to be a star. He was just so physical and big and fast, ran great routes. So, I'm not surprised at all by the success that he's had.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to during the offseason, I was doing some draft profiles on different players, and I was talking to one of the old defensive coaches for Texas. And this goes back a few years when Maryland had played Texas. And I was like, you played against a guy named, or maybe it was Texas A&M, and that you played against a guy named DJ Moore. And he goes, he ruined my entire day. Like, it was just awful. And that's what DJ Moore does to opposing defenses. It's just really hard to figure him out because he can do a little bit of everything. And I think that's a positive thing too. He can be in the slot. He can go deep. He can do 50-50 contested stuff. He can do a little bit of everything. And so it'll be really interesting to see what Ben Johnson does with this combination of players now. And I did want to ask you, because one thing that kind of stood out this last year, things obviously got frustrated. The offensive coordinator gets fired early in the season in Chicago. The head coach gets fired right after Thanksgiving. There's just a lot of dysfunction. You have a rookie quarterback in Caleb Williams trying to figure things out. And you saw some disgruntled DJ Moore on the sideline, and people kind of started getting a little critical of that, of his posture, his, kind of the way his body language on the sideline. And Ben Johnson, I guess, addressed that to him this year and saying, you need to fix the body language. Was that something ever you saw in college? Like just the emotion of the competitive side of DJ kind of feeding out sometimes?
No, I don't really recall him, pouting or having bad body language or having any sort of issues. I think he was more of a quiet kind of star, not like a super emotive, flashy kind of guy. So, it's possible, but it definitely wasn't a trend.
So I'm gonna blame that on Matt Eberflus then and say it was his fault that DJ got a little disgruntled. But all right, Jeff, I really appreciate your time. I know people are really interested to see how the Ruben, a 4th round pick, you'd hope that you see something out of, and it doesn't have to be immediately in this massive impact, but you want to hope that you drafted somebody that you see on the field and definitely makes the team. So we'll see how that goes, but I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your weekend.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.